Emily woke up before sunrise, just like every other day. Her small apartment was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the occasional sound of a passing car outside. The room was cold, and the air smelled faintly of coffee from the night before. She wrapped a worn-out sweater around herself and walked to the tiny kitchenette to boil some water. There wasn't much to eat, just a slice of old bread and half a banana, but she didn't complain. She never did. Life had been hard for a long time, and she had learned to find comfort in the little things. Her name was Emily Carter, 23-year-old waitress in a high-end luxury hotel in the city. On the outside, she looked like any other tired young, a woman trying to survive in a fast-paced world, but deep inside her heart, she carried a secret of burning passion that had lived within her since childhood. She loved the piano, not in a casual way, but in the way people love the air they breathe. It wasn't just music to her, it was a part of her soul. A language she could speak when words failed. A place she could run to when the world became too loud. But nobody around her knew this. Not the hotel guests she served every day. Not her coworkers, who only saw her as the quiet, reliable girl who never missed a shift. Not even her manager, who thought she was too shy and too soft-spoken for such a busy place. No one could imagine that Emily, the girl who poured water and served food with a polite smile, was capable of filling a room with music so beautiful that it could bring people to tears. She hadn't always been this quiet. When she was little, she was full of laughter and energy. Her father was a music teacher and her mother was a nurse. They weren't rich, but they were happy. Emily learned to play the piano at the age of 5, sitting beside her father on the wooden bench of an old upright piano in their living room. She loved every second of it, the sound of the keys, the feeling of her fingers dancing over them, the way her father smiled when she got it right. She dreamed of becoming a concert pianist, traveling the world and playing for thousands of people. That dream was all she thought about, but then everything changed. Her father passed away suddenly. When she was 16, a heart attack took him in the middle of the night, and just like that, the music in their house stopped. Her mother tried to hold things together, but the burden was too heavy. Emily had 2 younger siblings, and soon, all the money they had was going toward food, rent, and school fees. There was no time for music, no money for lessons. The piano was sold to pay bills. Emily didn't complain. She put her dreams in a box, locked them away in her heart, and became an adult far too soon. She took whatever job she could find, cleaning, babysitting, working late-night shifts at diners. Eventually, she landed the job at the hotel. It paid better, and it gave her a stable schedule. Every day, she wore her crisp, black and white uniform, tied her hair back, and became part of the background. She moved silently through the glittering halls of the hotel, delivering champagne to the rich and famous, smiling at guests who never looked her in the eye, cleaning up after grand events she could never afford to attend. But every night, after her shift ended, she would go home, make herself a cup of tea, and sit down in front of an old keyboard that she had bought from a pawn shop. It was scratched and some keys stuck, but it still played, and that was all that mattered. She would put on her headphones so the neighbors wouldn't complain, close her eyes and lose herself in the music. She played the pieces she remembered from childhood, the ones her father had taught her. And then, slowly, she began to create her own melody songs full of pain, hope, longing, and love. She never showed her music to anyone. It felt too personal, too fragile. The idea of someone hearing her play made her nervous. What if they laughed? What if they didn't understand? So she kept it all to herself. It was her escape, her secret world. It's her way of surviving in a life that often felt too heavy. Sometimes at the hotel, she would find herself lingering near the grand piano in the main ballroom. It was a beautiful instrument, polished to a shine, with gold trim and a deep, rich sound. Only professional musicians were allowed to touch it, and Emily never dared go near it when anyone was around. But in the quiet moments when no one was watching, she would gently run her fingers over the smooth keys, imagining what it would feel like to play in front of a crowd. One night, during a fancy wedding reception, she was assigned to the main hall. The pianist, a charming man in a tuxedo, played elegant classical pieces as guests dined and danced. Emily watched from the side as people clapped and praised his talent. Her hands itched to play. Not because she wanted attention, but because she missed the feeling of sharing something beautiful with others. She missed the connection that only music could bring. But she stayed quiet. She always did. After the party ended and the guests left, she helped clean up the mess half-eaten. Cake, spilled wine, broken glass, and then walked past the piano one last time before leaving for the night. She touched one key, just one, and smiled sadly as the note rang out in the empty hall. Outside, the city was alive with lights and noise. Emily walked home with her hands in her pockets, thinking about her dream, the one she had almost forgotten. She wondered if it was too late to chase it. If maybe, just maybe, she still had a chance. The next morning, she woke up to the same cold apartment, the same dry bread, the same long walk to work. But something inside her felt a little different, a little stronger. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the music from the night before. Maybe it was the memory of her father's smile. Maybe it was just the idea that even in a world full of people who didn't see her, she still had something special inside her. Something no one could take away. At the hotel, she slipped back into her role. She served coffee, cleared tables, and smiled politely. But every time she passed the piano, she felt it calling to her. Not with words, but with the quiet, powerful pull of something meant to be. No one knew what was coming. Not the guests, not her coworkers, not even Emily herself. But fate had a funny way of changing everything in a single moment, and that moment was closer than she thought. Because sometimes, even the quietest person in the room has the loudest voice, they just need the right chance to let it sing. And for Emily, that chance was coming soon. It was a bright Saturday morning, and the hotel where Emily worked was full of energy and excitement. The staff were moving quickly, carrying trays, setting up tables, and checking final details. The hotel was preparing for one of the biggest events of the year, a grand luxury gala. This gala wasn't just any party. It was a celebration filled with powerful businessmen, politicians, celebrities, and rich guests from all over the country. Everyone was talking about it. The kitchen was filled with the smell of expensive dishes. The lights were perfect, the flowers were fresh. Everything was arranged beautifully. Emily had been working in this hotel for nearly 2 years. But she had never seen so much glamour in one place. Her job today was to serve drinks and small snacks in the ballroom. She had to move quietly, always smiling, always careful. There was no room for mistakes in front of such important guests. She wore her usual uniform black skirt, white shirt. A tight bun in her hair end walked among the rich and elegant people like a shadow as she moved through the hall. Her eyes couldn't help but land on the grand piano standing in the middle of the ballroom. It looked stunning, shiny under the golden lights, its black surface like glass. A famous pianist was supposed to arrive and perform during the evening. The man was Adrian Velmont, a man known for playing in royal events and private concerts. For billionaires, people were excited to hear him live. Emily had read about him online. His videos had millions of views. But more than being impressed, she felt something else deep in her heart. Jealousy. Not the angry kind, but the kind that comes when you know you could have done something similar if life had gone differently. She knew she could play just as, well, maybe even better. But instead of wearing a suit and sitting under a spotlight, she was here, carrying glasses and staying invisible. Hours passed, and guests started arriving. Expensive cars lined up outside the hotel. Red carpets were rolled out. Photographers took pictures. Inside the ballroom was glowing. The guests wore beautiful gowns and suits. Laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses filled the air. Emily moved through the crowd like always graceful, but unnoticed. Suddenly something changed. A buzz moved through the staff like electricity. Emily saw her manager walking quickly, speaking to someone on the phone, looking worried. Other waiters whispered and pointed. Something was wrong. Curious, Emily slowed her steps to listen. The pianist wasn't coming. Adrian Velmont had missed his private flight due to bad weather. He was stuck in another city and had called just minutes ago to cancel. The hotel manager was panicking. The entire event had been advertised around his performance. People were expecting live music, a magical piano concert. The guests had already asked when he would play. The manager ran to the sound team and asked them to prepare. Background music instead, something calm and elegant, but it wouldn't be the same. Everyone knew that. The charm of a live pianist was what made these events unforgettable. Playing recorded music would feel cheap. It would disappoint the important guests, and the hotel's image could be damaged. Emily stood nearby, pretending to clean a table while listening. Her heart started beating faster. She felt something strange inside, an urge, a voice pushing. Her fingers itched. Her mind raced. Should she say something? She had never performed in public before. Only her walls, her old keyboard, and maybe a neighbor or two had ever heard her play. But this was different. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She could offer to help. Maybe just play something soft until the evening ended. No one else knew how to play. Maybe, just maybe, this was her moment. But what if they laughed? What if she messed up in front of all these important people? What if they said no? She stood frozen, her tray shaking slightly in her hands. The voice inside her kept whispering, louder and louder. Do it, Emily. Just ask. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the manager, her hands cold, her throat dry. He was arguing with the event organizer and wiping sweat from his forehead. Excuse me, sir, she said softly. The manager looked up, surprised to see her. Yes, I can play the piano, she said, barely above a whisper. He blinked, confused. What? I know how to play, she repeated, a little louder now. If you'd like, I could try. Just until the guests are done with dinner. Organizer raised an eyebrow and chuckled. You're a waitress. Emily felt her cheeks turn red, but she didn't look away. Yes, but I've played for years. I can do it. The manager hesitated. He looked around. No pianist, no replacement. Just a nervous crowd getting more curious by the minute. He sighed. All right, he said, unsure. Play one piece. If it's decent, we'll let you continue. Emily nodded, heart pounding. She handed her tray to another waiter and walked slowly toward the grand piano. The ballroom looked enormous. Now, everyone was busy eating and talking, but a few people noticed her approaching the piano. They looked confused. A waitress? Was she just cleaning it? Emily sat on the bench, her hands trembling slightly. She closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered her father, his warm smile, the way he used to tap her fingers gently when she got a note wrong. She remembered the small, broken keyboard in her apartment and the nights she cried while playing her own songs. Then she opened her eyes, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. She started with a gentle melody, one of her own. It was soft, calm, like the sound of rain on a window. The music floated through the air, touching ears before minds. Could even realize it, the ballroom began to change. Conversations slowed, then stopped. Heads turned. Forks were placed down. Who was this? Emily kept playing. Her hands were no longer shaking. She danced over the keys like water flowing through a stream. She played another piece, deeper, more emotional. It was a mixture of classical tones and modern harmony. It felt like the music was telling a story, one of heartbreak, of struggle, of quiet hope. Guests turned their chairs toward her. Some whispered in surprise. Others just stared. Even the manager stood at the edge of the room, shocked. The rich and powerful who never noticed her before were now completely focused on her. Not her uniform, not her role, not her status, but her gift. The music was all they could see and hear. Emily lost herself in the rhythm. She forgot about the crowd, the hotel, the job. She was in her own world now, pure, beautiful, and full of passion. Her fingers moved fast, then slow, then soft, then strong. She didn't follow a script. She followed her heart. When she finished the final note, there was a long silence. Then slowly, applause began. Gentle at first, then louder and louder, until the whole room was filled with claps and cheers. Some people stood. Others took out their phones and started recording. A few even shouted compliments. Emily stood up quickly, her face red. She looked down, unsure of what to do. But the manager walked up to her, his eyes wide. "That was credible," he said, almost in disbelief. The event organizer nodded. "Keep playing, as long as you want." Emily sat back down, her hand still shaking, but her heart full. For the rest of the evening, she played song after song. Some were classical, some were her own. The guests were enchanted. They kept asking about her. Who was this girl? Where had she trained? Why hadn't they heard of her before? But no one had an answer, because until today, she was just a waitress. But tonight, she was something else. She didn't know it yet, but this night was going to change her life forever. Emily sat on the piano bench, the soft lights of the ballroom shining above her. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, still trembling from what had just happened. The crowd that had once ignored her now sat silent, waiting, watching. It felt like a dream. She had come to work that day just like any other, putting on her uniform, tying her hair and preparing herself to serve quietly in the background. But now all eyes were on her, and the air was filled with a strange, exciting energy. She took a deep breath and began to play again. The first note echoed through the room like a drop of water hitting still glass. The melody was slow and emotional, a song she had written during one of her loneliest nights. It told a story without words, a story of loss, of dreams pushed aside, of quiet strength. Her fingers moved gently at first, then gained power as the song grew. She poured her heart into each note, not thinking about technique or perfection, but only about feeling. The room was completely still. Guests who had been talking loudly earlier now sat with their hands folded in their laps, their eyes fixed on the young woman at the piano. Some looked amazed. Others looked deeply moved. A few had tears in their eyes. It was as if the music was speaking directly to their hearts. Emily didn't notice the reactions at first. She was lost in the music. But as she finished the piece and lifted her hands from the keys, the silence that followed made her look up. It was the kind of silence that's filled with emotion when people are too touched to speak. Then, slowly, the applause began. This time, it wasn't just polite clapping, it was thunderous. It rolled through the room like a wave. People stood up, some whistled, others shouted, "Bravo!" Emily's eyes widened. She had never experienced anything like it. Her heart beat wildly in her chest, and her cheeks were warm. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Not because of her uniform or her job, but because of her music, because of who she really was inside. The applause lasted a long time. Emily stood up shyly and gave a small bow, not knowing what else to do. She started to move away from the piano, but the crowd called out, "One more, please, one more." She smiled nervously and sat back down. This time, she chose a brighter, more playful tune, something that reminded her of childhood afternoons, of sunshine and laughter. The mood in the room shifted again. People began to smile, tapping their feet or swaying to the rhythm. It was as if she had the power to take them on a journey, guiding their emotions with her music. Somewhere near the back of the room, a man named Thomas Granger watched in silence. He was a well-known music producer, though few people recognized him because he preferred to stay out of the spotlight. He had worked with many great artists in his career, but tonight, something about this performance made him sit forward in his chair. He was drawn to the music in a way he hadn't felt in years. It was raw, honest, and completely original. He leaned toward the event organizer and asked, "Who is she?" The organizer replied, "Just one of the waitresses." "You believe it?" Thomas raised his eyebrows. He had heard talent before, but this wasn't just skill. This was something rare, something real. After another song, Emily finally stood up again, gently nodding to the crowd as they applauded once more. Her hands were tired, but her soul felt light. She had never played for so many people before, and now she was filled with a strange mix of joy and disbelief. As she stepped away from the piano, guests began to approach her. Some wanted to shake her hand. Others wanted to know her name, where she trained, who had taught her. Emily answered as best as she could, always, with a humble smile. I never went to a music school, she said. I just learned at home. One woman in a sparkling dress said, You moved me to tears. That song, it reminded me of my mother. Another man said, You have a gift. You belong on the world's biggest stages, not in a dining hall. Emily didn't know how to respond. The attention felt unreal, but deep inside, something began to grow. A small but powerful feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope Thomas. Granger waited until most people had left before walking over to her. He introduced himself gently, not like someone important, but like someone truly interested. I've worked in music for over 20 years, he said. But I haven't heard anything as powerful and honest as what you played tonight. Where? Did you learn to play like that? Emily looked down, a little shy. My dad taught me when I was young. He passed away. I couldn't go to music school. I just kept playing on my own. Thomas nodded slowly. Did you write your own music? Yes, she said. A lot of what I played tonight was mine. He smiled. I thought so. It didn't. Sound like anyone else? It sounded like you. They talked for a while. Emily told him about her life, how she worked long hours, how she played on an old keyboard in her small apartment, how music had always been her way of surviving. Thomas listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he said, I'd like to help you. Your talent is rare, Emily. People need to hear your music. Emily's eyes widened. Help me how? I can get you into a real studio, he said. We can record your songs. I can introduce you to people who believe in music, not just fame. Emily didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to scream yes. Another part was scared. Was this real? Could she trust it? Could she really step out of the shadows and chase the dream she had buried so long ago? I'm not making promises about fame or money, Thomas said gently. I'm just saying, if you're ready to let the world hear you, I can help open the door. Emily nodded slowly. Her heart was full, and her mind was racing. For years, she had only dreamed. But now, someone was giving her a real chance. By the time the event ended, Emily was exhausted but glowing. She returned to the staff area, where her coworkers stared at her like she was a stranger. Some clapped. Others looked shocked. One of them said, Emily, we had no idea. That was amazing. Even her manager, who had always been strict and distant, smiled at her. You saved the night, he said. Thank you. As she walked home under the stars, the night air felt different, softer, brighter. The city lights twinkled like they were cheering her on. She replayed the evening in her mind over and over. The crowd, the applause, the music, the man who had offered to help. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel forgotten. She felt possible. She reached her apartment, opened the door, and sat down at her old keyboard. She placed her fingers on the worn keys and smiled. She didn't need to hide anymore. Her music had found its way into the world, and the world had listened. And this was just the beginning. Emily woke up the next morning feeling different. The usual weight of her life wasn't there. Instead, she felt light, like something inside her had shifted. She lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, remembering everything that had happened the night before. The grand ballroom, the shining lights, the crowd watching her with amazement, the music pouring from her fingers like it had been waiting all her life for that one moment. And then she remembered Thomas Granger, though. Music producer who had approached her with kind eyes and real interest. He said he wanted to help her. At first it had felt like a dream, but now it was real. She could still hear his words. If you're ready to let the world hear you, I can help open the door. She got out of bed, made a cup of tea, and sat. At her small table, her phone buzzed with messages. One was from Thomas. He had sent her a polite and encouraging message, asking if she was free to meet him at his office the next day. The rest of the messages were from coworkers, friends from the hotel, and even some guests who had managed to find her number from the hotel staff. People were saying how deeply her music had touched them. Some shared how her melodies reminded them of old memories, lost loved ones, and dreams they had buried. Emily couldn't stop smiling. Her heart felt warm, full of something she hadn't felt in years' pride. Later that day, she went to the hotel to return her uniform. When she walked through the staff entrance, the other employees turned to look at her. They didn't see just a waitress anymore. They saw someone else, someone special. Some clapped softly. A few smiled and whispered kind words. Her manager came out of his office, his arms crossed but his eyes soft. "You've caused quite a buzz, Emily," he said. "I'm sorry if I broke the rules," she said quietly. "No," he replied with a small laugh. "You saved us, and you reminded us that sometimes we don't see the diamonds right in front of us." That made her smile. It was strange being treated like someone important, but deep inside she still felt like the same girl who had been walking these halls just a day ago. She still remembered what it felt like to be invisible. That memory wasn't going away. But now it was being replaced with something new possibility. The next day, Emily visited Thomas's office. It wasn't a huge, flashy place. It was simple, filled with instruments, soundboards, and shelves of music books. There were pictures on the wall of musicians he had worked with, some of them famous, others not. But every picture had one thing in common: passion. Thomas welcomed her warmly. He offered her tea and sat with her like an old friend. "I don't want to push you into anything," he said. "This world music, recording, public life, it's not easy. But your gift is too rare to be hidden." Emily nodded, still unsure. If she was dreaming, "I've never done anything like this." He smiled. "That's okay. I'll guide you." He asked her to play a few pieces on the grand piano in the studio. Emily sat down and played one of her original compositions, something she had written on a rainy night when she felt completely alone. As the notes filled the room, Thomas closed his eyes and listened. When she finished, there was a long silence. "That's the one," he said. "That's your voice." Over the next few days, Emily began recording her music. It was strange hearing her own songs played back through professional speakers. At first, she felt nervous and shy. She made mistakes, stopped, apologized too much, but Thomas was patient. He encouraged her, calmed her nerves, and reminded her that imperfection was part of beauty. They worked late into the evenings, polishing melodies, adjusting sound levels, and choosing which songs to record first. Emily had never felt more alive. Every hour she spent in that studio felt like a step closer to the life she had dreamed about as a child. The girl who once practiced on an old keyboard in a dark room was now in a real studio, creating something lasting. Word spread quickly. The video from the hotel event had gone viral. Someone had recorded her performance that night and posted it online. Millions of people had watched it. The comment section was full of praise. Some wrote that her music gave them goosebumps. Others said it brought them peace in the middle of hard times. Few even said they cried while watching news. Outlets picked up the story. Unknown waitress stuns elite guests with emotional piano performance. Emily's name started appearing on music blogs and social media. People wanted to know more about the mysterious girl who had played from the heart. Reporters called the hotel. Interview requests came in. A local radio station asked if she would perform live on air. Emily felt overwhelmed. She had never been in the spotlight before. She wasn't used to people asking about her life. She wasn't sure how much to share. But with Thomas's support, she began to speak not just through music, but through her story. In interviews, she talked about her father, about growing up surrounded by music, about the pain of losing him and the sacrifice of selling their family. Piano. She spoke honestly about working as a waitress, about struggling to keep her dreams alive. She didn't try to sound perfect. She just spoke the truth. People loved her even more for it. She wasn't just talented. She was real, a symbol of hope. A reminder that sometimes greatness hides in the most ordinary places. Within weeks, Thomas helped her release her first song online, a piece called Home Without Sound. It was one of the songs she had played at the gala. The melody was full of emotion, and the recording captured every detail of her performance. It quickly gained attention. Downloads increased. Music lovers from around the world sent her messages. Emily used the little money she made to improve her small apartment. She bought a second-hand upright piano. She placed it near the window, where sunlight could touch the keys. Every morning, she would sit there with a cup of tea and just play, letting the music flow. Despite all the attention, she didn't forget where she came from. She returned to the hotel one day, not to work, but to thank everyone who had supported her. She brought homemade cookies for the staff, hugged her old coworkers, even sat down for a few minutes to play one last song on the hotel's grand piano. The ballroom was empty, but it didn't matter. It was her way of saying goodbye to the place that had unknowingly given her a stage. That night, she met with Thomas again. They talked about the future albums, concerts, maybe even a music tour. One day, but Emily had one more request. "I want to help others," she said. "There are so many kids like me, people with talent but no chance. I want to create something for them." Thomas nodded. "A foundation?" "Yes," she said. "A place where they can learn, where they don't have to hide their dreams." They began planning. Emily decided to use part of her growing earnings to start a scholarship fund for young musicians from poor backgrounds. It would be named after her father, the Carter Music Hope Fund. It was her way of giving back, of honoring the man who first showed her the magic of music. As the weeks passed, Emily's life transformed in beautiful ways. She was no longer a shadow walking through rich ballrooms. She was a name people remembered, a sound people cherished. But more importantly, she was a light to those who had been in the dark for too long. She didn't become arrogant or forget the pain she'd had once. Carried, she still lived simply, still walked with humility. But now her days were filled with purpose. She wasn't just surviving, she was living, creating, inspiring. And all of it had started because she found the courage to raise her voice too. Let the world hear what had been inside her all along. Emily was no longer just the girl who worked quietly behind the scenes. She was the music that stayed in people's hearts long after the last note had been played. The day of Emily's first big concert had finally arrived. It wasn't in a small room or a quiet corner of the hotel anymore. This time it was a grand concert hall in the heart of the city, a place where the world's best musicians had performed. Her name was on posters, on the digital screens outside the building, and even printed on the tickets people proudly held as they waited in long lines to enter. For most of the people who had bought those tickets, Emily wasn't just a new artist. She was a miracle, someone whose story had touched their hearts even before they had heard her music. Inside the concert hall, the air was filled with excitement. The seats were all taken, and the audience was filled with different kinds of people music. Lovers, reporters, critics, people who had seen her video online, and even some of the guests from the hotel gala. Many had traveled long distances just to hear her play in person. Didn't care that she hadn't gone to a famous music school or that she had once been a waitress. They only cared about the way her music made them feel. Backstage, Emily stood in front of a mirror. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform tonight. Instead, she wore a simple but beautiful navy blue gown. Her long hair flowed gently over her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled with nervous excitement. She looked like someone who belonged on that stage, but in her heart, she still felt like the same girl who used to play her broken keyboard in a tiny apartment. Thomas Granger came to check on her. He had been her mentor, her guide, and her biggest supporter since that night at the hotel. Now, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You ready?" he asked. Emily took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Remember," he said, "you're not here to impress anyone. You're here to share your heart. That's what they came for." She nodded slowly. She had no fancy tricks, no backup band, no dramatic lights or special effects. She had only her music, and that was enough. When she walked onto the stage, the room erupted in applause. Emily blinked at the bright lights and the sea of faces looking up at her. For a second, she felt overwhelmed. But then she spotted a few familiar faces in the front row, her old co-workers from the hotel, her little sister, her music teacher from primary school, and even her former manager. They were all smiling with pride. She sat down at the grand piano, her fingers gently touching the keys. The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop, and then she began to play. Her first piece was the one she had written for her father. It was slow and emotional, full of longing and love. The audience listened without moving. Some closed their eyes. Others wiped away quiet tears. Each note seemed to tell a part of her life story. Her pain, her strength, her dreams. It was all there. Then she moved on to a brighter, happier song, a celebration of how far she had come. It was full of energy, hope, and light. The music lifted the hearts of everyone in the room. People started smiling, holding each other's hands, tapping their feet to the rhythm. Emily's confidence grew with each piece she played. Between songs, she spoke briefly to the audience. Her voice was soft but clear. I used to think dreams were only for people with money. With connections, with the right background, she said, but now I know they're for anyone who refuses to give up. The crowd clapped loudly. This music, it's not just mine. It belongs to every person who's ever felt forgotten, every person who's ever had to put their dreams aside. I see you, and I'm playing for you. The audience stood up and gave her a standing ovation right there, but she didn't stop. She played one final song, a brand new piece, never shared before. It had no name yet, but it was full of truth. It rose and fell like waves in the ocean. It sounded like laughter, tears, memories, and hopes all at once. The music filled the room, then softened, then disappeared into silence. When the final note ended, there was a moment of stillness. And then the room exploded in applause. People stood again, clapping until their hands hurt, shouting her name. It was more than just appreciation. It was love. Backstage. After the concert, she met with fans, signed autographs, and took photos. So many people thanked her not just for her music, but for her courage. One woman said, "You reminded me that I used to paint." A young boy whispered, "I want to learn piano like you," a man in his 60s. Hugged her and said, "Your music made me feel something I hadn't felt in years." Emily smiled through all of it, her heart full. This was more than she had ever imagined. In the following weeks, her songs topped online music charts. Radio stations played her tracks. She was invited to perform on live television shows and was interviewed by famous magazines. She was even offered to collaborate with other musicians, but she stayed true to her style. She didn't want fame for the sake of being famous. She wanted meaning. She used part of the money she earned to create the Carter Music Hope Fund, named after her father. It provided instruments and free music lessons to kids from poor families. She visited schools, played for children, and told them her story. Wherever she went, she gave them the same message. You are enough. Don't stop dreaming. Her apartment became a little nicer. She had a bigger kitchen now, more space to breathe. But she still lived simply. Her favorite place remained by the window, where her upright piano sat. Some mornings, she still made tea and played just for herself, for the love of it. One sunny afternoon, she was invited back to the hotel where everything had started. But this time, she wasn't there to serve food. She was there as a guest of honor. The staff had organized a small celebration in the ballroom. The same grand piano she had played months ago stood in the center as she walked through. Familiar halls, the memories came rushing back, the tray in her hands, the polished floors, the long, tiring shifts. But this time, she was greeted with hugs, with smiles, and with respect. She was no longer invisible. She sat at the piano and played one more song. It was a thank you, a musical letter to the hotel, to her past, and to all the people who had seen her that night for who she really was. A young waitress, new to the staff, stood nearby, watching with wide eyes. Emily noticed her, smiled, and nodded gently. After the music ended, she walked up to the girl and asked, "Do you play?" The girl looked shy, a little, "But I'm not good." Emily smiled warmly. "Neither was I, till I believed I could be." That moment said everything. It wasn't just about the music, it was about the journey, the courage, the belief that even from the quietest corners, greatness can rise. Emily's story became more than just a story. It became a symbol, a reminder that dreams can live, even when the world forgets them, that talent can survive, even without money or fame, that hearts can be healed with the simple sound of music. And so, Emily played on, not for fame, not for praise, but for the joy of bringing light to others, because once, when no one was watching, She played alone in the dark, and now she played so the whole world could feel again.